Welcome all viewers to our channel. We are glad to see you here, where we share amazing stories from people's lives. Each of you is important to us, and we will be interested to know what country and city you are from. Please write about it in the comments. Now let's move on to our first story. Athena Walker exhaled tiredly as she closed the hospital door behind her. Her shift was 12 hours long, another grueling night in the ICU. She was used to busy weekdays, but this night had been especially hard. Several surgeries, emergencies, and endless calls from worried relatives of patients. Athena felt devastated, but satisfied that she had been able to help. Now all she wanted was a shower, comfy pajamas, and the quiet of her apartment. Starting her car, an old silver sedan, she turned on the radio and drove down the deserted road. The clock read about 4 in the morning. The city was asleep, with only sparse streetlights illuminating the streets. It was her favorite time of day, a time to forget about the hustle and bustle for a while. But she was disturbed by a flash of headlights in her rearview mirror. A police car with its blinker on was moving right behind her. At first Athena thought the officers were just rushing to a call, but when the siren got louder, she realized they were asking her to pull over. "What's going on?" she said quietly to herself as she pulled to the curb and turned off that engine. She didn't break any rules. She was driving at the authorized speed. The car was insured, and her papers were in order. Athena opened the window and took out her driver's license and registration papers from her bag. An officer's, a white-skinned man with a cold stare, approached her car. His face was a mixture of fatigue and displeasure. Athena tried to look calm, but inside she was beginning to feel uneasy. "Good night," the officer said dryly, looking at her as if she had already committed a crime. "Your license and registration, please." "Of course, officers," Athena replied, handing over the documents. "May I ask why I was stopped?" He didn't answer immediately, silently studying her driver's license. Then he frowned. "That driver's license looks suspicious. Where'd you get it?" "I beg your pardon," Athena marveled, not believing her ears. "This is my real driver's license. I got it at the local DMV a few years ago." The policeman showed no interest in her words. His voice became harsher. "Get out of the car." Athena frowned. She knew her rights and knew she had to obey, but she was overcome with a sense of humiliation. "Officer, may I ask why?" "I didn't violate anything. I said get out of the car," he repeated, putting his hand on his gun holster. The movement startled her, and she decided not to argue. Carefully opening the door, Athena stepped out of the car, trying not to make any sudden movements. "Step up to the hood," the officers ordered. She complied. A second policeman, a young man with an equally stern expression, came over to assist in the search. They began to scrutinize her car. They opened the trunk, turned over the bag on the passenger seat, even checked the first aid kit in the glove compartment. "What are you looking for?" Athena asked quietly, trying not to give away the tremor in her voice. The officers did not respond. Their actions seemed unreasonable and humiliating to her. She saw another car stop in the distance, and its driver seemed to be filming what was happening on his phone. After 20 minutes of careful checks, the officers, finding nothing suspicious, returned her papers. "Be more careful next time," the first officer said, never explaining exactly what she did wrong. Athena didn't know how to answer. She simply took the documents, got into the car, and, barely waiting for the patrol car to drive away, let the tears flow. On the drive home, Athena went over everything in her head. She knew she hadn't violated anything, but in the eyes of the officers, she was a suspect. Why? Because she was black, because her car wasn't new, or just because they could do that. When she got to her apartment, her phone was already bursting with messages. A video of her humiliating search was posted on the internet. It showed her standing in the rain and two officers turning her car upside down. In the comments, people spoke up for her, but some condemned her. "Why is this happening to me?" she whispered, staring at the phone screen. She had no idea that this video would be the beginning of something bigger. Her life changed the moment she heard the siren, but there were challenges ahead of her that she didn't yet know were coming. The next morning, Athena woke up to the muffled ringing of the alarm clock and the heaviness pulling her to her bed. She dreamed that everything that had happened during the night was just a nightmare, but when she saw the notifications on her phone, she realized it was reality. A video of her being stopped by the police went viral on social media. A debate raged in the comments under the post. Many supported her, outraged by the police action, but there were also those who accused her of unworthy behavior. Some argued that she must have been hiding something if her car was searched so thoroughly. Others said she got what she deserved. Athena knew it wasn't just an accident. She had become another victim of bias. However, her anxiety increased when she received a call from the hospital manager. "Athena," he began cautiously, "we need to talk." It all started that night, when an officer took one look at her driver's license and immediately assumed it was fake. "Where did you get this id?" he asked sharply, scrutinizing the card with disbelief. "I told you, DMV. It's a real driver's license." "Too clean," he muttered. "How long have you been driving?" "About 5 years," she answered calmly, trying not to be provocative. The officers turned to his partner. "Those driver's licenses are too perfect. We should check it out." The men walked back to their patrol car, leaving it standing on the curb under the sparse drops of rain that were beginning to fall. Athena knew she hadn't violated anything, but her heart clenched with anxiety. The officers returned a few minutes later. The first of them gestured to the car, opened the trunk. "What? Why?" Athena was confused. "We're doing a standard background check. Your rights are in doubt." "But I didn't violate anything." "Do you have a warrant?" "Either you obey, or we will detain you for insubordination." That answer sounded like a blow. Athena realized that if she argued, the situation would only get worse. She complied, opening the trunk. The cops started searching. First it was the trunk. They pulled out the first aid kit, the spare, even the old boxes she was taking to the recycling center. Then they switched to the passenger compartment. They checked the glove compartment, turned over her purse that was on the passenger seat. One of the officers found a wallet with her medical aid. "So, you work as a nurse?" he asked sarcastically, as if questioning her profession. "Yes, I'm a nurse." Her voice was restrained, but inside she was seething. "Interesting. Why do you have that kind of money in your wallet?" "It's my paycheck," Athena said, already barely holding back tears. Her response elicited a contemptuous chuckle. The officers handed her papers to his partner and headed for the patrol car. An hour passed. The search was over, but Athena was not released. The officers sat her in their car, talking about something. The rain intensified, and her hair began to get wet. Finally, the first officers came out and threw the papers on her hood. "No offense. You're free to go." "Is that it?" Athena could barely contain her anger. "You spent an hour checking my things, my papers. You humiliated me, made me stand in the rain, and now you just say go." The officers leaned closer, his face growing cold. "You can file a complaint if you don't like something," he said, looking her straight in the eye. She took her papers and quickly left without answering. The whole scene left invisible scars on her. Later, at home, Athena tried to figure out what to do next. She was angry, hurt, and humiliated, but she also felt fear. She didn't know if she should file a complaint. Her situation could only get worse. But soon a new threat came. In the morning, she was summoned to work to discuss the incident. The hospital management, who learned about the video, expressed concern that the scandal could affect the reputation of the institution. "We're suspending you until the investigation is complete," the manager said dryly. Athena tried to object, but it was useless. Her world began to crumble right before her eyes. She felt she had to fight. She couldn't let the system crush her. However, there were difficult decisions ahead of her and new challenges that could break even the strongest person. That morning, while Athena was still trying to sort through her emotions after the humiliating night's incident, her phone kept vibrating. Messages came one after another. A friend had sent her a link to a social media post. "Athena, is that you in the video?" At first, she couldn't believe her eyes. The video of her being stopped by police has already garnered thousands of views. The author of the post wrote, "This is how our police treat people who just want to go home. What is that if not bias?" The footage, shot by an unidentified passerby, showed everything. How the police forced her out of the car, how they searched the trunk and turned over her belongings. The officer's harsh tone and baseless accusations were also clearly heard on the footage. The video provoked a storm of emotions. Under the post, hundreds of people shared their thoughts. Many were outraged. "Why didn't they stop the white driver? She was just coming home." Further proof that our system is rotten to the core. But there were also those who attacked Athena. She must have been hiding something. Why else would she be so nervous? Maybe she should have just kept her voice down. The comments stirred up a storm of emotions in Athena. She felt naked in front of the whole world. On the one hand, it was humiliating, but on the other hand, it was fair. Now she had proof that it wasn't her fault. Meanwhile, the video started going viral on various platforms. Human rights activists drew attention to Athena's case. One of the local human rights activists, Julian Harris, wrote her a message. "I've seen the tape. Do you want us to help you file a formal complaint? This should not go unpunished." Athena was hesitant at first. She knew that if she started to fight, her life could become even more difficult. She had already faced suspension at work, and now she was worried about the anonymous calls that started coming in after the video was published. Some threatened her, calling her a disgrace and an enemy of the law, but others supported her. Two people in her neighborhood sent down scenes of messages of support. One neighbor even offered to walk her to work to make Athena feel safe. Meanwhile, the author of the video, a man in his 30s named Matt Carter, got in touch with Athena himself. He told how he had happened to be at the place. "I was driving home when I saw the cops pull your car over," he said. "At first I thought it was just a routine check, but then I noticed the way they were treating you. It wasn't right." Matt became an important ally to Athena. His video was indisputable evidence, and he agreed to help if the case went to trial. A few days later, the video went viral. Local media started talking about it. One of the leading TV channels broadcast a story about the Athena case. Journalists contacted the police, but they refused to comment, citing an ongoing probe. However, the media attention prompted police authorities to launch an internal investigation. Activists organized a rally in front of the police department, demanding justice for Athens and reform in the system. On the placards were written slogans: "Stop persecuting the innocent," "Justice for Athens," "Equal rights for all." The situation was gaining momentum. Athena found herself in the center of a spotlight that was weighing on her more than she could have anticipated. She felt like her life would never be the same again. "Are you ready to go all the way?" Julian Harris asked at one of the meetings. Athena thought for a moment. She realized that fighting for justice was not only a chance to change her life, but also an opportunity to speak out against a system that had suppressed people like her for years. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm ready." But she didn't know yet how many obstacles would stand in her way. There was a battle ahead of her, that would require a strength she didn't even know she had. Athena knew that the video of her stop had gone viral, but she couldn't imagine the magnitude of the consequences. Barely opening her phone in the morning, she saw hundreds of notifications, messages, comments, social media mentions. Her name had come to symbolize a discussion about police bias, but that wasn't all. At first, the flood of messages was encouraging. People expressed support, shared their stories, and offered help. Athena felt grateful and proud of those who stood up for her. "We're with you, Athena. You are strong. Don't give up. No one has the right to treat you like this." But along with it came some dark sides. Social media posts began to be flooded with racist comments and vicious attacks. Why was she even outside at that time? She was obviously hiding something. People like her always attract trouble. Maybe she should have been arrested. Then there would have been less of a fuss. Athena was shocked to read the hate-filled messages. But the worst part was when the personal threats started coming. "We know where you live. Stop before it gets worse. You think anyone's going to help you? No one cares about your story." She blocked down scenes of accounts, but new messages kept coming. Her address and phone number somehow got on the net. Strangers started calling her, threatening to teach her to be quiet. Soon the phone rang. It was Julian Harris, a human rights activist who had already helped her with advice. "Athena, are you okay?" he asked with genuine concern. "Not really," she replied, trying not to cry. "They threaten me. Some of them even know where I live. This is serious. I'd recommend leaving the apartment temporarily. We can help organize a safe place." She hesitated at first, but she knew Julian was right. The tranquility of her home, which had once seemed like a fortress, was now a trap. Meanwhile, a real storm was brewing on the internet. Some famous personalities came out in support of Athena. One of them, a popular blogger, made an emotional post. "This video is further proof of systemic racism. We cannot remain silent. Athena deserves justice." But detractors weren't left out either. An entire post appeared on the platform, trying to make Athena look like a suspicious person. The author claimed that she provoked the situation herself and was trying to capitalize on pity. This post garnered a lot of attention, increasing the division in society. Athena was caught between two fires. Her supporters supported her, but her opponents fueled the fire by making her look like a public enemy. In yet another blow, Athena's employer's behavior was unexpected. Amid the heightened scrutiny of her identity, the hospital management issued a statement. "While we respect every employee's right to protect their rights, we also encourage not dragging personal issues into the professional realm." Athena was taken aback. Instead of support, she received a hint that her conflict might damage the hospital's reputation. However, there was something positive. The virtual storm attracted the attention of a lawyer of impeccable reputation, Margaret Lawson. She called Athena and offered her help. "I saw how you were treated. It's outrageous. I want to represent you." Athena hesitated. She felt grateful, but she was also afraid it would only aggravate the situation further. "It's your decision," Margaret continued, "but know that silence only strengthens those like them. If you're ready to fight, I'm with you." By evening, Athena had turned off the phone, hoping for a brief respite from the constant tension. But even in the silence, she couldn't calm down. Her mind was full of questions. How far is she willing to go? Is it worth it to keep fighting? Or is it better to retreat and let this storm subside? She knew one thing: her life would never be the same again. There was a battle ahead of her, and she had to decide if she was ready to endure it to the end. The next day, after much deliberation, Athena made a decision. She would file a formal complaint. This was her chance not only to get justice for herself, but also to be a voice for those who had never dared to fight. With Julian Harris and Margaret Lawson, her new attorney, She went to the police department, her heart clenched with tension as she filled out the necessary paperwork. Every step she took seemed to be a protest against the injustice she had endured. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Julian asked before they entered the building. "It's a long way off, and the system rarely plays fair." "Yes," Athena answered firmly. "I don't want to be silent anymore." The complaint sparked another wave of public interest. Activists organized a press conference where Athena spoke publicly for the first time. She was tense, but her voice sounded confident. "I can't afford to stay in the shadows. This case is not just about me. It's about everyone who is subjected to injustice just because of the color of their skin." Her speech went viral on the internet, garnering millions of views. She became the face of the fight against systemic racism. But her life became even more complicated. Meanwhile, an internal police investigation has begun. Officer Thomas Grayson, who stopped Athena, gave an official statement in which he tried to justify his actions. "I acted within protocol. Her behavior made me suspicious. There had been a lot of drug smuggling in the area in recent months. I was just doing my job," he said, referring to standard procedures, but his words felt defensive, not sincere. Athena and her team realized that Grayson was trying to shift the blame onto the victim. At a hearing organized to assess the legality of the officer's actions, Athena faced the cold and impenetrable machinery of the system. The lawyer representing the police tried to put her in a negative light. "Ms. Walker, could you explain why you were so nervous if you weren't hiding anything?" he asked, clearly trying to drive a wedge in her confidence. "I was nervous because I got pulled over for no apparent reason and started searching my car." "This is not a standard situation," Athena replied, holding back her anger. Counsel attempted to suggest to the commission that her emotional state was evidence of something amiss. The key moment was the day the video produced by Matt Carter was presented. Margaret Lawson made a strong case that the officer's actions did not follow protocol. "The tape shows Officer Grayson treating my client in a demeaning manner for no reason. His behavior cannot be called professional," she stressed. The video elicited mixed reactions from the panel. Some members clearly sympathized with Athena, but others looked skeptical. Officer Grayson, for his part, attempted to discredit Athena by stating that she was allegedly aggressive and unyielding. His testimony sounded convincing, but Margaret was ready. "My client never once raised her voice or resisted," she objected. "Officer Grayson, don't you think your view of her was biased from the beginning?" Grayson didn't answer, but irritation flashed in his eyes. However, resistance to the system was not only evident in the boardroom. Athena continued to face threats and pressure. Her suspension was delayed, and her employers hinted that her publicity was causing unnecessary problems for the hospital. "Do you have any idea how many calls we've gotten because of you?" the manager said coldly. But Athena knew this was another attempt to silence her. She refused to give in, determined to see it through. In parallel with the struggle in court, Athena received strong support from activists. In solidarity, people organized a march outside the court building. Crowds held placards with inscriptions, "We are with Athena. Justice for all. Equal rights is our goal." This march marked a new turning point. Media attention and public pressure made it impossible for the police to simply hush up the case. But Athena knew justice was still a long way off. Officer Grayson and his defenders continued to take every chance they could to delay the trial and devalue her fight. "The system will always find a way to protect its own," Julian told her after one of the hearings. "But you have to believe that your truth is more important." And Athena believed. Every day of the fight made her stronger. She was no longer just a nurse returning from the night shift. She became a symbol, a spark of change that was destined to start a fire. She had her toughest battle ahead of her, But she knew she was not alone. Athena Saturday in the small office of the hospital, opposite the human resources manager. Outside the window, life was buzzing, cars honking, people hurrying about their business. But inside the room, time seemed to stand still. Athena, we appreciate your contribution to the hospital and realize that you are going through a difficult time right now. The manager began, avoiding a direct look. But due to the current situation, we are forced to suspend you from your duties. Those words hit harder than Athena expected. Suspend? For what? She asked, trying to remain calm. The manager folded her hands on the table and pretended to look for the right words. It's not a punishment, she quickly added. We just want to avoid unwanted attention to our hospital. You've become a figure attracting media interest, and that could affect our patients. Athena felt anger boiling up inside her. She'd given 3 years of her life to the hospital, working nights, taking extra shifts, never complaining of fatigue, and now her career was in jeopardy just because she dared to stand up for her rights. Are you saying it's my fault that someone violated my rights? The manager looked uncomfortable, but quickly changed her tone to official. We're just taking precautions, Miss Walker. This is temporary. We'll get back to you as soon as the situation settles down. Walking out of the office, Athena felt her legs give out. She sat down on the nearest bench in the hallway, trying to calm down. Her pride kept her from crying, but her chest tightened with resentment. She remembered her patients, the elderly woman who always thanked her for her care, the teenager she supported when he was undergoing difficult treatment. Every time she put on her uniform, she felt proud of her work, but now the hospital had pushed her aside like an unnecessary thing. Back home, Athena tried to distract herself, but her phone once again exploded with notifications. Many colleagues who had heard about her suspension wrote words of encouragement. That's not fair, Athena. You're one of the best nurses ever. Don't give up. We know you're right. But there were other reports, far more chilling. It's your own fault. You should have just accepted it. Why did you put us all at risk? Those words hurt. Athena understood that some colleagues feared for their jobs, but the betrayal was too painful. A few days later, Athena met with Margaret Lawson to discuss what was going on. They're afraid of publicity, Margaret observed when Athena talked about the situation at work. It's a typical way of applying pressure. They hope that if you lose support at work, you will give up. But I can't just sit around and wait. I have bills to pay. If they won't let me come back, what will I do? Margaret hesitated for a moment. We can file a discrimination complaint. They don't have the right to suspend you just because of your fight for rights. But that's another case that will take time and effort. Athena nodded. She realized that each new action would only make her life more difficult, but it was impossible to back down. Meanwhile, public pressure on Athena's work was mounting. After the story was published in the media, the hospital was in the spotlight. People wrote on social media, accusing the management of injustice. Why aren't you supporting your employee? This is unacceptable. How can you treat a person who is dedicated to helping others in this way? Management issued a press release claiming Athena's suspension was unrelated to her case against the police, but most people saw it as an attempt to save face. One evening, Athena received an unexpected call from one of her patients, an elderly woman named Mrs. Carmichael. "Honey, I heard about what happened," she began. "It's not right. You're the best person I've ever met in this hospital." These words touched Athena to the core. "Thank you, Mrs. Carmichael. I'm doing the best I can. Keep fighting," the woman said. "If you need help, I am always at your side." Despite the pressure, Athena realized that her struggle was taking on a broader meaning. It wasn't just about her, but about anyone who faced bias at work or in society. She decided that even if she had to look for a new job, She would not stop. Her voice was needed not only for herself, but also for those who were afraid to speak up. The struggle continued. Though there was no clarity on the horizon, Athena knew that each day brought her closer to justice. Every time she returned home, Athena felt her heart clench with anxiety. The once cozy apartment had become a place where fear overshadowed everything. The letter found on her doorstep one morning was the first signal that the fight for justice had moved beyond the courtroom. The note contained only a few words: "Know your place or you'll regret it." Athena tried to convince herself that it was just an evil prank, but the situation soon escalated. Her front door was covered in offensive graffiti. There were words on the wall that were impossible to read without crying. "You're not the kind of person who deserves justice. Go back where you came from." The next day, on her way back from another meeting with her lawyer, Athena noticed that the windows of her apartment were broken. Inside the room was chaos. Furniture was overturned. Things were scattered. But worst of all, there was a picture of her family on the floor, on which someone had drawn a red cross on her mother's face. She immediately called Julian Harris, who arrived a few minutes later. "This isn't just pressure anymore," he said, looking around at the destruction. "It's a real threat to your life." "What should I do?" Athena asked, barely holding back her tears. "We'll report this to the police. You deserve a defense, even if it seems ironic considering who you're fighting." But Athena knew that trusting a system that had already betrayed her wouldn't be easy. After reporting to the police, she was given temporary protection, but the officers assigned to her house seemed indifferent. One of them, standing at her door, rudely threw, "You brought this on yourselves." Those words were yet another reminder to Athena of the depth of bias she faced. At the same time, the landlord began to show his discontent. In the third week of the threat, he called Athena to inform her that she needed to vacate the apartment. "I can't afford to keep renting you an apartment," he declared. "We have a quiet neighborhood here, and your case has attracted too much attention. It's ruining the reputation of the building." "But that's illegal," Athena objected. "I have a contract until the end of the year." "We'll find a way to dissolve it," he replied coldly. At this time, the threat was becoming more and more real. Anonymous calls came even deep into the night. The voices, often distorted, threatened her and her loved ones. "We know where you work. We know where you live. You can't hide." One night, Athena heard strange noises outside her window. When she looked out, she saw a hooded shadow disappearing into the darkness, leaving a note on her doorstep: "The next step will be your last." It became a turning point. The next day, she moved into a safe house, organized by Julian and his team. The small apartment was a far cry from her old home, but it was a place where she could feel safe, at least for a little while. "You're not alone," Julian said as he helped her move her things. "We have a whole team ready to protect you." "But how long can I live like this?" Athena asked. "As long as it takes for the truth to prevail." Meanwhile, the media picked up on the theme of threats. Athena's story became even more high-profile. Human rights groups organized rallies in her support, demanding enhanced protection for those facing persecution. However, this too led to a new round of hatred. Fake stories appeared on the internet accusing Athena of using her story for PR. Margaret Lawson realized that the situation was out of control. She filed a petition to protect Athena and increased pressure on the police to investigate the vandalism and threats. "This is not just an attack on my client," she said at a press conference. "This is an attack on justice and human rights. We will not stop until those responsible are punished." At night, sitting in her new apartment, Athena felt the weight of this struggle weighing on her shoulders. Her personal life, her job, her home all had crumbled because of one unjust police stop. But at the same time, she realized if she gave up now, those trying to break her would win. She clenched her fists tighter and whispered into the darkness, I will not give up. Never. There were more challenges ahead of her, but she was ready to fight to the end. After all she had been through, Athena began to feel the darkness that had overtaken her life gradually draining away her strength. Each day was similar to the previous one: threats, destroyed things, social judgment. She could feel the tension growing in her body and head, fatigue becoming her only constant companion. But this time, at a moment when despair seemed to overwhelm her, there was a light in Athena's life, and that light was her friend, Leela. Leela has been by Athena's side since the beginning of her journey in medicine. They went to college together and supported each other in difficult moments. Leela is a bright, confident woman with whom Athena has always been able to share her worries. But until recently, she didn't know what her friend was going through in her final months. After Athena moved to a new place and some serious problems started in her life, Leela decided to intervene. Athena, you can't go on like this. I know you're strong, but you need a break. Just a little. Leela spoke with a determination that came from her very core. Athena felt her shoulders relax a little. Leela always knew how to find the right words. I can't go on. I just don't know how to go on, Athena admitted, feeling tears protrude in her eyes. Leela took her hand and continued. You will fight, but you need to rest. I can offer you temporary lodging. My apartment. I don't go in there very often. You can stay with me until we get things sorted out. I'm willing to help you. You're not alone, Athena. Athena couldn't believe that her friend had offered her not just shelter, but real support. Leela was willing to shoulder some of her burden. It was what she needed most of all, not just a roof over her head, but a place where she would be accepted, where she could relax a little, forget about the constant stress. 2 days later, Athena stood on the threshold of Leela's apartment, inspecting the cozy but modest interior. The room was full of books, photographs, and paintings, all of which spoke of care and attention to detail. It was warm and familiar, not like the empty apartments she'd stayed in after she'd been kicked out of her old place. Leela went to the bathroom, leaving Athena for a few minutes so she could look around. At that moment, Athena felt the heaviness that had been clutching her chest loosen a little. Everything around her seemed a little lighter, despite the difficulties she was about to face. As soon as Leela returned, she immediately walked over to her friend and hugged her tightly. You deserve peace, Athena. Know that I will be there for you. I care about you, and I will support you, no matter how difficult things get. At first, Athena hardly ever left the apartment. She felt that she didn't have the strength to deal with everything at once, and just enjoyed the fact that she could sleep without fear of being woken up in the night. Leela was there for her, offering help and attention. She arranged moments of relaxation for Athena, quiet evenings with movies, walks in the park, and quiet conversations where Leela let her friend talk about everything that had accumulated. One evening, sitting on the balcony with a cup of tea, Leela suggested another important thing to Athena. You know, I was thinking, why don't you get help from a therapist? It's okay to talk about your feelings and worries. You don't have to keep everything inside. Athena sighed. She had resisted the idea of therapy for a long time, thinking it an unnecessary step, especially in light of all the legal and social affairs she had to deal with. But Leela was right. She couldn't go on living with this burden without sharing it with someone. Do you think it will help? She asked with some uncertainty. I'm sure you are. You can't go through this alone. A psychologist can help you deal with these thoughts and feelings. Athena was silent for a long time, but finally nodded. Okay, Leela, you're right. I'll give it a try. The time spent at Leela's place gradually brought relief. Athena began to recover, both physically and emotionally. She was able to get back on her feet, analyze everything that had happened, and sort out her feelings. Leela continued to be her support, but also guided her on a path where she had to make her own decisions. At this time, despite the best efforts of the police and lawyers, Athena realized that the fight was far from over. Her case continued to attract attention, and her life remained in danger. But she now knew that she had someone who believed in her, who was willing to support her. And even though she had not only a fight for justice, but also for a normal life ahead of her, Athena suddenly realized that she had a chance to not only restore her reputation, but to regain the sense of security she had once lost. In Leela, she found the support she needed to not give up. The dark tunnel she had entered didn't seem endless now. There was a light at the end of this tunnel, a light she could see if she kept walking. The trial, which began a few months after Athena filed a complaint against the officer's actions, turned into a real marathon. Throughout this struggle, despite everything that was going on around her, she felt more and more like the system she was trying to change was trying to consume her. Her legal team, led by the experienced and determined Julian Harris, continued to search for evidence that could show that the police officer's actions were not an accident, but part of a wider pattern of bias and discrimination. They dug through documents, witnesses, and records, trying to find anything that might turn the tide. During this time, Athena felt her strength drying up. Every day brought new challenges, not only in the courtroom, but also in her personal life. At times she doubted that this struggle would ever lead to victory, that justice would truly prevail. But those around her, especially Leela and Julian, constantly reminded her that she was not alone, that every step forward was a step toward the truth. One day, after weeks of silence, Julian finally brought good news. "We have a few leads," he said, sitting in her new apartment where she seemed to be starting to regain her confidence. "We've found some evidence to confirm that this officer has a history of other incidents involving racism and inappropriate behavior." Athena sat her down on the edge of the couch, trying to comprehend his words. She could feel the tension starting to let go, but at the same time she realized that this wasn't over. Julian and his team went to police archives and forged links with other human rights organizations to gather evidence about the accused officer's past. As the investigation deepened, shocking facts surfaced. The officers who stopped Athena was not the only one with a reputation for misconduct. Internal affairs investigations revealed similar instances in which the officers had unjustifiably stopped and mistreated minority people. In one case, he accused the suspect of drug possession, even though all the testimony and evidence said otherwise. In another, almost identical case, he searched a woman's car, claiming she had allegedly forged documents, although her driver's license was perfectly legal. The most interesting thing was that these incidents had not yet been properly investigated. Evidence was covered up and allegations were hushed up. The officers continued to work despite the repeated complaints that were made against him. This was an important discovery that offered hope for a possible turnaround in Athena's favor. The next few weeks were a real test for Athena. Despite the mounting evidence, the system resisted. The police, instead of admitting their mistake, tried to cast her behavior and reputation in a negative light. New accusations began that she was over-exaggerating her complaints and that her actions were only reinforcing racial prejudice, as if she had created the conflict herself. The cases continued to be filled with an overwhelming amount of paperwork, each new trial exacerbating Athena's nervousness and despair. But every time she felt like she had no more energy, she turned to her lawyer, and he set her up to go on again. Julian believed she was right and made her believe that this battle was important not only for her, but for the entire system, which at some point had to change. "It's not just your case. It's an issue that affects everyone. We are changing the future. Don't give up," he said when Athena, losing her strength, was about to give up everything. After about a month of struggle, when it became obvious that the case had reached a critical point, another important event turned the situation around. The legal team discovered another piece of evidence, a videotape of a previous incident where the same officers had used unlawful force. The footage showed him, for no reason at all, treating the suspect aggressively and threatening him with a weapon. That video was the real key. It was shown in court. The reaction was instantaneous. Lawyers and activists began collecting signatures, publicly expressing support and demanding an investigation into all incidents involving these police officers. For Athena, it was an event that restored her faith that justice was possible after all. When the judge announced the opening of a formal investigation into the officers who had stopped her, it was a victory, albeit a small one. But she realized there were more battles ahead. Each day, with each step in court, as her lawyers won on one front, Athena felt her confidence return more and more. She wasn't ready to give up. Everything that had happened to her was part of a larger movement for rights and justice, and now that she saw her efforts begin to bear fruit, she was ready to fight to the very end. The court battles that began as a personal tragedy were now becoming a symbol that the system must not remain unchanged. With each new piece of evidence, each statement, each new step, Athena and her team were getting closer to the answer they had been waiting for. The day Athena had waited months for had finally arrived. The trial that had turned her life upside down had come to an end. She sat her day in the hall, nervously thumbing through sheets of paperwork with her fingers. Leela sat her day beside her. Her presence was the reassurance that helped Athena gather her thoughts. At first, she didn't believe she could win, but every step, every witness, every piece of evidence brought her closer to that cherished victory. When the judge entered the room, it was as if time stood still. Athena felt her heart start to beat faster and looked at Julian, who was sitting next to her, ready to hear the decision. The court found the police officer's actions unlawful, the judge pronounced, his voice firm and decisive. These words did not reach Athena's consciousness at first. She could not believe that this was happening to her. The court finally recognized that the police officers had exceeded his authority. The judge went on to explain that the officers' actions were not for safety, but to unlawfully violate Athena's rights. The court also ruled that the policemen should be punished, and it was decided that the victim should be compensated. Athena felt her shoulders relax. All the heaviness of the last few months suddenly slid away, and she could breathe. It was a victory, but it wasn't complete. The court had ruled the officer's actions illegal and ordered him fired. But it wasn't enough. Athena couldn't go back to her old life, the life she had once built. Everything was ruined. The payment in compensation awarded by the court was substantial but could not cover what she had lost. The hospital staff she had once worked with had changed the way they viewed her. The trial caused severe fluctuations in her life, affecting her reputation. Even though she had a court victory, immediately after the court decision, she received a call from the hospital's chief physician informing her that she was being suspended. The official version: the hospital wanted to avoid further discussion and reduce tension in the team. But Athena was well aware that this was just an attempt to suspend her from her activities. When she returned home, she discovered another piece of unpleasant news. Her bank had received a notice that her landlord had decided to terminate her lease. This was a consequence of the pressure put on her tenancy. However, it no longer surprised her. Every step she took in this struggle was accompanied by blows to her life. When all this news reached Athena, she felt despair begin to fill her again. The court victory, the compensation, and the police officer's dismissal did not give her back what had been lost. People she had once socialized with looked at her warily. Colleagues at the hospital avoided her, and the activists who had supported her throughout the trial began to tire. After all, even after winning in court, She was still at the center of hatred and condemnation. Athena realized it wasn't that simple. Winning in court was only one step toward justice, but her life would not return to the way it had been before the incident. As before, she felt the world around her continuing to press down on her. It seemed that even a court victory could not restore her sense of security and belonging. One day, sitting in her new apartment and contemplating the future, Athena realized that even if all her legal moves were correct, she still had a lot to lose. But in that moment, she had a strange feeling. It was a feeling of change. She realized that despite all the difficulties, she had the opportunity to rebuild her life. Perhaps not in the way she had imagined it before, but still in her own way. Leela was once again at her side, and her support was more necessary than ever. You did the right thing, Athena. You have shown everyone that there is nothing more precious than your own dignity and right to justice. Whatever happens next is your choice. These words restored Athena's faith in the future. She realized that she had experienced not just a trial, but a general and profound transformation of her inner world. Although it was impossible to restore her old life, she could build a new one, free from fear and prejudice. Athena returned to her business. She started working with human rights organizations, helping others who were in similar situations. She was able to help those who found themselves victims of law enforcement violence. This was her new path. Amidst all the losses, this work brought her peace and fulfillment. She finally felt like she was in control of her destiny. With each new step in this new role, she found herself again. Though her life was not the same as it had been before, there was still light in it, light that she had learned to see again. Athena Saturday in her small but cozy office, looking back at her new life. Everything was starting from scratch: a new apartment, new neighbors, a new city. She had moved far away from her old place to free herself from the burden of past events. Reflecting on what she had left behind, she realized that she was ready for a change. Athena decided it was time for a fresh start, not only for herself, but for those who felt as helpless in the face of the system as she once did. Her decision to leave town was a difficult but necessary step. The hospital where she used to work refused to return her to her former position. Despite her victory in court, the doctors she had started out with now shunned her for fear of public opinion. The people of her city began to look at her differently. As a symbol of scandal, Athena felt she needed to leave it all and find a new place where she could believe in people again, in her calling. She decided to go to a small town where no one knew her. The town was picturesque, quiet, and was known for its community where everyone supported each other. Here she could be a part of something bigger than just her personal fight for justice. Athena wanted to create a space where people could ask for help, and where no one had to feel humiliated or deprived of their rights. The process of opening a medical center was difficult, but Athena was prepared for the challenges. She used her compensation to rent the space and buy the necessary equipment. The new place was no easier to work in than the old one, but she felt more independent and empowered to fight for those who needed her help. Unlike large hospitals, where much depended on insurance companies and administrative decisions, here she could directly influence the process and not let money and social status determine who would receive care and who would not. Her medical center was for people who didn't have enough money for medical treatment. Many of the patients were low-income, homeless, or migrants without insurance. They were lost in the healthcare system, and for them, the Athena Center was the only place where they were not met with bias or judgment. It was her decision to create a place where everyone would feel important, where no one would be left without help, regardless of their social status or color. She was joined by other professionals, many of whom had themselves faced difficulties in their own lives and now burned with a desire to help others. Athena became not just a doctor, but a symbol for many. She became an embodiment that it is possible to fight injustice, even if it takes a lot of effort. However, her new life has not been without its problems. Athena faced difficulties in the beginning. Small towns can be just as violent as big metropolitan cities, especially when it comes to people who don't fit in. Her clinic attracted the attention of the local authorities. Some of them suspected that Athena might be responsible for spreading undesirable ideas because she was known on social media as an activist fighting racism and police brutality. Soon, anonymous complaints about her work began to pour in. But despite this, she never strayed from her goal. Athena knew that it was important not just to work in a medical facility, but to create space for active change. It was in this small town that she wanted to develop her fight against injustice, using medicine as a weapon. She organized meetings with locals, gave lectures on human rights and access to healthcare, encouraging people not to be afraid to fight for their rights. She even organized several fundraising events to raise money for medical treatment for those who could not afford it. Every day, her clinic became more and more popular. Although there were still people around who saw her work as a threat, the support from ordinary people continued unabated. They came for counseling, supported her work, and then told their friends and acquaintances how Athena had changed their lives. There was no longer any room for rejection or bias at her center. Anyone who needed help could get it. Athena knew that the fight would not end with just opening this center. She realized that she was just beginning to build her influence in her city. But this was far more important to her than any previous court victories or media fame. Now she felt like she was finally doing something that really mattered. On one such day, as she sat in her office thinking about the future, a young woman entered her office with a baby in her arms. She was clearly from a dysfunctional family, and her look of utter hopelessness. She didn't know what would happen next, but she had heard that Athena helped those who couldn't afford treatment. Athena stood up from the table and walked toward the patient. Her face lit up with a warm smile. She invited them to sit down and immediately began to explain the steps to be taken to help the woman and her child. In that moment, looking into the woman's eyes, Athena realized that right here, in this small office, she was doing what really mattered, not for money, not for fame, but for the real lives of people. For those moments when she could help those in need. Her fight against injustice would not have been complete without the process of saving lives. Several years have passed since the day Athena took the drastic step of leaving the city and opening her clinic for the underprivileged. This period has been a time of personal transformation for her, but also a time of fighting for justice, which has now become her life. By working tirelessly and helping those who faced injustice, she not only rebuilt her life, but also gave hope to thousands of people in similar situations. However, her story did not go unnoticed. Athena always knew that her cause did not end with just opening a clinic. She continued to fight to bring attention to systemic racism and police brutality. But there came a time when her struggle took on a much larger scale. Like many people, Athena could not stay in the shadows. First her clinic, and then her activism attracted the attention of the national media. The story of her struggle, her victories in court, her solutions to police abusers, and finally her efforts to help the community became topics of discussion on the news channels. Athena was no longer just a doctor, but a symbol of resistance to racism and a system that for years had ignored the needs of certain segments of the population. One day, when Athena was being interviewed for a major news channel, she heard words that were a revelation to her. "Your story has been an inspiration to many. You have proven that one person can change the course of events, that the fight against injustice does not end with victories in the courts. We see that your work has helped not only to improve people's lives, but also to change public opinion." Athena felt her heart fill with pride. She realized that her struggle which had started from a small clinic, now had a strong public response. People from different parts of the country began to support her initiatives. She had become not just a doctor and an activist, but a true symbol of change. Her activism, along with her past history of being a victim of police injustice, has brought about real change. Thanks to her efforts and those of other activists, police reforms have been initiated in a number of cities. Society has realized that problems with racism and discrimination require systemic change. The reforms included mandatory training for police officers to combat racial bias, as well as improved approaches to dealing with disadvantaged populations. Human rights organizations began pushing for an independent monitor to be assigned to each police station to prevent the mistreatment of citizens. These measures were a step towards the police system finally realizing that its responsibility is to serve all citizens, not just certain groups. Athena participated in public discussions, helped develop training programs, and held many meetings with government officials. She became a lobbyist for reform and a fighter for the rights of those whose voices had long gone unheard. Its history inspired people. Marches, rallies, and demonstrations were organized in different parts of the country where people demanded justice and equality. These protests were an expression that the Athena movement was now part of a much larger, global process of change. People began to realize that they could act, that they could demand that their rights be respected. Although Athena herself often faced aggression and threats, she did not stop. Her work became more and more important, and her influence grew stronger every day. She felt that her life now mattered not only to herself, but also to an entire generation who, like her, had fought discrimination and injustice. As the years passed, Athena stood on a pedestal, receiving awards for her contributions to social reform and activism. She continued to fight for those who could not fight for themselves, supporting other organizations and projects to improve the lives of oppressed people. Her clinic thrived and became more in demand each year. She became a symbol for those who faced the system but were not willing to give up. When Athena traveled to a major city to participate in a public forum on police reforms, she was greeted like a hero. Thousands of people gathered to hear her speak. She stood on the stage, looking at the faces of those people, and realized that she was part of something much bigger than just a personal story of struggle. The system can try to break us, but it can never stop our quest for justice, she said, addressing the crowd. We are the ones fighting for a future where everyone, no matter their color or social status, has the right to justice. We will fight until this world is a better place for all. The crowd exploded with applause. Athena felt her inspiring story growing into a movement that would continue after her. She was ready to go on, to fight and inspire others, because there was a fire burning in her heart that now lit the way for others, and that fire was far stronger than any threats and obstacles. This story is not just about fighting injustice. It is a story about how one person who has gone through pain and loss can become a symbol of change, inspire action, and make a difference in the world. Although the journey was long and difficult for Athena, she knew that every step was worth it to find her true calling. In the end, she became a voice for those who could no longer remain silent. Thank you for your attention and for letting this story be a part of your day. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. See you again.